climate change.
A very good afternoon to everyone, especially to our President, Mr. Victor Ma, and also to our board members, Mr. Martin Cox, Event Director, Food and Hotel Asia, and delegates who have logged into our webinar today. Not forgetting to our attendees tuning in from US and Europe, a very good morning to you. Today marks the third edition of our ASEAN Coffee Talk series, and this is the second time that we are working with our host, Food and Hotel Asia, in making this happen. Organized by the ASEAN Coffee Federation, today's webinar covers an important element of the coffee industry. The theme, Effects of Climate Change on Coffee Production in ASEAN, is very close to our hearts. Sustainable practices and how we could overcome the ever-changing environmental impact on coffee is certainly of paramount importance to our industry. This afternoon, we are delighted to have with us 4 distinguished panelists who will share their insights and thoughts on the subject matter. Our panelists are Mr. Tim Scherer, Managing Director and Vice President of Green Coffee and Cocoa, Starbucks Coffee Trading Company from Switzerland. Mr. Alfredo Nuno, Director, Starbucks Global Farmer Support Center, and Jacinta Alsacia, Costa Rica. Dr. Dave DeHazy, Senior Coffee Expert from Vietnam, and Ms. Eileen Gallagher, Business Advisor, Climate Change and Sustainability from BSR Hong Kong. Moderating the session this afternoon, I'm pleased to have with us Ms. Pachita Juan, Chairperson of Philippine Coffee Board, and also our second Vice President of the ASEAN Coffee Federation. With Pachita steering the discussion with the views from our expert panel, it will be an insightful session for all, I'm sure. To our host, Food and Hotel Asia, thank you once again for partnering ACF in putting together this webinar, especially to Martin, the event director. Without further ado, I will hand over to Martin to say a few words. Martin, please.
Thanks, Stephen, and greetings to everyone wherever you are in the world, and to our viewers on Facebook Live, of course. And thank you for all tuning in for what promises to be an enriching program this afternoon, and a fantastic demonstration of the spirit of the coffee community in coming together in a digital setting. As Stephen introduced, my name is Martin Cox, Event Director at Informa Markets, responsible for delivering our industry-leading FHA events here in Singapore. Like many industries, the events industry has been greatly affected by the COVID pandemic, and this has given pause to allow us the opportunity to rethink, redevelop our approach to connecting people and industries across the globe, which is essentially the core objective of any trade event. This has given rise to fantastic digital initiatives and collaborations such as this one, together with our forward-thinking partners, ASEAN Coffee Federation, industries like the coffee sector continue to connect and do business throughout this period of restricted social interactions. If anything, this period has re-emphasized the need to all of us for physical interactions and meetings. And as the organizers, we already have plans in place for enhanced experiences at trade shows, which combine the very best features and benefits of both the physical and the digital space when both FHA Food and Beverage and FHA HORECA return in 2021 and 2022 respectively. It's in our DNA to provide platforms and create opportunities for businesses such as yourselves. And as always, we welcome your thoughts and feedback in order to continually improve and enhance the experiences we deliver to you. If you'd like to get in touch with us, please do so through our website or through the chat box in this webinar, and our team will be sure to reach out. Finally, I'd like to just thank our partners, the ASEAN Coffee Federation, our great lineup of speakers, as well as our fantastic sponsors for their support and dynamism in bringing this digital event to life. I'll hand over now to my colleague Victor Ma, President of ASEAN Coffee Federation, to deliver the welcome remarks and kick off the discussions. Over to you, Victor.
Good day to everybody who has zoomed in on this event, and very warm welcome to all my friends who are on the panel today, and especially to Chit, who has, as usual, will be hosting this event. And may I wish everybody a happy International Coffee Day, as today is the 1st of October, which is the International Coffee Day. As you all know, climate change is something which the ASEAN Coffee Federation is very much in tune with and very much working towards. It is one of our mission statements in which we hope we will be able to help all our farmers in this region. As everybody probably knows, in this region, we have two of the largest coffee producing countries in the world, Vietnam and Indonesia. And both over the last couple of years have been affected by strange weather phenomena. At times when it's supposed to be raining, you're getting a rain, we are getting a drought, and that has affected not only the production, but also the quality of the coffee, right? So I'm very happy that we've got a wide range of speakers here today, which I hope will enlighten us on which direction we should go towards climate change. How should we help our farmers in both, not only Indonesia and Vietnam, but to all the other new emerging producing countries like Myanmar and Philippines as well. So without much ado, I see we're very tight for time. I'll hand it over to Chit to proceed with the proceedings. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm sure that video got you thinking, what if the world, what if we didn't have coffee anymore? This afternoon, I'm very happy to be around panelists who are experts in their field. And we start off, of course, with Miss Eileen Gallagher of BSR. Hello, Eileen. And thank you for accepting our invitation to discuss the lay of the land, so to speak. And we're joined, of course, by Tim Scherer of Starbucks, coming all the way, zooming in from Switzerland. Alfredo Nuno of Starbucks Global Farmers Groups, and who make sure that all the farmers and agronomists are in line with what we're going to discuss today. And Mr. Dave Daze, Dr. Dave Daze, who's a longtime friend, and of course will talk to us about Vietnam. So before we start with Eileen's presentation, I'd like our panelists to please just give, like, I could read all your bios, but they're really extensive and long. And, if we only had a minute or two in the elevator, maybe our guests would like to know a little more about you. So maybe start with Eileen. Hi, Eileen. You can do a self-introduction.
Yes, hi, thanks for having me. So as Pachita mentioned, I'm Eileen Gallagher. I'm with BSR in our Hong Kong office. BSR is a sustainability advisory group. So I work with businesses on sustainability and climate change. I've been in the field for about 15 years. 3 years ago, I completed a study looking at how climate change is affecting businesses in Southeast Asia. So I look forward to sharing some of those learnings with you today. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Eileen. And of course, Tim, we're back here, and please tell them again a little something about you.
Yes, of course. Hello, Pachita. Hello, everybody. My name is Tim Shah. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. I work for Starbucks Coffee Trading Company. I've been with the company for 13 years. In my current role, I'm responsible for leading the global coffee and cocoa purchasing strategy for Starbucks. That includes all strategies around growing and ethical sourcing. I also oversee the network of the farmer support centers around the world, the R&D and commercial aspects that we have on our own farm in Costa Rica, Hacienda Alsacia. And last but not least, I'm responsible for the business strategy for our newly opened visitor center in Costa Rica on the farm. I have been in coffee since 1988, which seems like a whole lifetime. And
thank you.
Great to be with you again.
Thank you, Tim. And Alfredo?
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you very much. My name is Alfredo Nuño. I'm Mexican. I've been working with Starbucks for the last 15 years, and I have the great fortune to lead the Farmer Support Center network that Starbucks has around the world, and chiefly the Farmer Support Center we have in Sumatra in the Asia Pacific region. And I am delighted to be here with all of you.
Thank you, Alfredo. And of course, Dr. Dave Daze. He apologizes for the non-video because of the very, very narrow bandwidth. But Dr. Dave, welcome. Please do a little self-introduction.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pachita, and thanks a lot to Victor from the ASEAN Coffee Federation for having me here. I've been working in coffee for about 22 years, most of my time in Vietnam. I started off as a researcher. I've been working on irrigation efficiency improvement for Robusta coffee. Later, I started working for Hans-Herr Neumann Foundation, developing public-private partnership projects for Asia Pacific with a specific focus on smallholder coffee farmers. And more recently, my role has changed a bit, so I'm currently advising the foundation still and part-time working for a German coffee roasting company, which is called Chibo. Besides that, I do some private consultancies.
Thank you, Dr. Dave, and welcome again to all our panelists. So to start off, as I said, to give us a lay of the land, may we ask Ms. Eileen Gallagher for her presentation.
Sure thing. Let me pull that up here. Just have a few slides that I will speak to. Well, thanks again for having me. So in my role here with BSR, I help businesses understand how climate change will and may affect them. In recent decades, we have already begun to see the impact of climate change on natural and human systems across all continents. So over the next few minutes, I'll describe how the physical impacts of climate change can be significantly damaging and disruptive to communities, ecosystems, individual health and well-being, business productivity, and the economy at large. I'll also describe how businesses and all aspects of a business can be affected. So this includes facility operations, sourcing of materials and ingredients, production, transportation, and distribution, and employee safety. Now, many people are drawing the links between what we're seeing today with COVID and climate change. In both cases, no one is immune. It is affecting the economy. It is affecting every business and aspect of a business. Both issues are major global risks that we're facing today. So what I want to emphasize here is the need to build resilience. And resilience is defined as that ability to anticipate, absorb, accommodate, and recover from shocks, such as climate change. And for the past several years, the World Economic Forum reports that the leading threat to businesses are extreme weather events, natural disasters, and the failure to act, the failure to mitigate and adapt to climate change. A research study has found that over the last 30 years, globally, $1 US out of every 3 that's spent on development has already been lost due to reoccurring extreme weather events. That amounts to nearly $4 trillion worldwide. So $4 trillion has already been lost. So it's imperative that each of us, as consumers and in the areas in which we work, build resilience in our communities, in our businesses, so that our businesses last and that they're resilient to the impacts of climate change. It makes business sense and economic sense. Now, as the world's fourth largest economy, Southeast Asia has seen rapid economic growth and urbanization over the last decade, and the population is expected to continue to rise. The Asian Development Bank finds that the region is one of the most vulnerable regions in the world to climate change, and it will likely experience economic losses larger than any other region in the world. So let's look at Indonesia and Vietnam, for example. In Indonesia, flooding is threatening its people, its ecosystems, and industry. At the same time, climate change is lengthening the dry season. So that's intensifying drought and depleting water resources that are critical for both industry and households. There are longer dry seasons, and that's giving way to more forest fires, which are exacerbated by the country's extensive logging and land degradation. 5 years ago, severe drought disrupted food production and left 1.2 million people in need of food aid. So by the end of the century, agriculture productivity could decrease by 18% due to climate impacts. This further contributes to the potential of food insecurity in the region. Indonesia also has the world's second largest coastline. This exposes 60% of its population and 80% of business production to sea level rise, storm surge, inundation. In Jakarta, land subsidence and port infrastructure are causing the city to sink faster than any other city in the world. In Vietnam, sea level rise and stronger cyclones and typhoons will continue to significantly contribute to flooding and saltwater intrusion into the Mekong River Delta, the Red River Delta, and the Central Coast. The Mekong Delta, where more than half of Vietnam's rice is produced, is projected to lose nearly 2,300 square miles to sea level rise, flooding, and salinization. The Central Highlands will experience extended periods of drought that we're already seeing today, which is affecting coffee and tea farms. Now, the region relies heavily on agriculture for rural livelihoods, food security, and increasingly to produce commodity and cash crops. And the risks can be felt across the agricultural value chain. So no matter where your business sits in the agricultural value chain, you may experience some climate shock. So it's not just at the farm level. So for instance, the workforce in Southeast Asia could be affected by warming temperatures, heavier precipitation, which are contributing to increased public health risks. Vector-borne diseases will be on the rise. Flooded roadways, ports, and other transport routes can disrupt the distribution of goods and services. We're seeing stronger demand for cooling, cold chain storage, and warehouses. At the same time, longer dry seasons increasing the demand for water pumping. So could this increase the energy costs that businesses are facing? Could it lead to electricity blackouts if there's not a secure energy source? And the poor quality of crops and other goods can diminish sales. Businesses may face competition from others that are demonstrating a commitment to climate change to secure customer loyalty. And then banks and lenders may limit access to financial capital if businesses do not manage their risks effectively. So what can businesses do? We always suggest that you start by assessing your risks. And we advise businesses to take what we call a three-dimensional approach. So you look at your hazards, your exposure to those hazards, because it's very location specific, and vulnerability. On the hazards we've just described in some detail, whether that's sea level rise, warming temperatures over time, or more acute hazards such as one-off events, such as a strong typhoon. But on exposure, we recommend looking not just within the four walls of your operations, but also on the relationships and the channels that you depend on. So your supply chains, your communities that you depend on for natural resources and your workforce. So who will be affected? Will it be the farmers you depend on, your immediate employees, the distributor, the distribution network, so the roadways, the ports, the buyer, the consumer? It's really important to look at those different relationships and channels. As for vulnerability, in my work, I've learned that this is where businesses tend to fall short. So vulnerability or underlying weaknesses can make climate risk worse for businesses. And the agricultural sector has high levels of vulnerability. The most obvious being seeds and crops that may be climate or weather sensitive or intolerant. Another element could be that livelihoods of monocrop farmers can be in jeopardy after one single adverse weather event or season. Rural communities may have limited access to healthcare or other services, or inadequate infrastructure could be easily flooded or damaged and potentially unable to protect communities or rebound quickly. So my point being is that climate risks will be worse for those that are already vulnerable or at a disadvantage. Now, the findings from such a risk assessment can help inform your next steps. So we suggest to explore maybe the gaps or what assets you have. So what tools, expertise, processes, management systems, or relationships that you have within the agricultural supply chain that you can leverage or enhance. What might you need to create or invest in? Can you co-invest with others to share financial burden? There are a range of options that you can use to build resilience for your business. And we can perhaps talk more about that within this hour. So I'll wrap by saying that no business, community, or individual is immune to climate change, and we need to be aware of what those potential impacts and risks are in order to act. So understand your vulnerabilities, both to the short and long-term shocks across your business and whom you depend on, from both the farmer to the buyer to the consumer. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Eileen. I mean, that is really shocking. I mean, these climate changes are really shocks to, like you said, monocrops and most of agriculture. So I'd like to ask Tim, as one of the biggest, if not the biggest coffee buyer in the world, can you share with us what you're seeing in Origin, Tim, and tell us what Starbucks is doing to combat challenges to coffee brought about by climate change?
Yes, of course, Pachita. Well, first of all, I think, Eileen, thank you very much for this presentation, which I think when you see it first, you really have to have it sink it in your mind, because the effect we're seeing that global climate change has on all of us is incredible. It's very, very concerning, and I think it makes it clear that we can talk about a very small, isolated area, which is coffee, but it really does affect everything we touch, every area that we all live in. So this is a much bigger subject to talk about than just specifically coffee. But if you go into coffee and you think about 25 million farmers in the world, but actually over 100 million people indirectly affected or somewhere connected in the supply chain, it becomes eminent for us that we have to do something. And to answer your question, obviously, we buy coffee in about 30 countries. And all of those countries are exposed to climate change in one way or another. I think the challenging thing is that it's not one size fits all. It's very different depending on the country where you look at. In some countries, it is a drastic weather change that goes from too much rain to too little rain. In some countries, it is an increase of rain versus less rain. So we really need to look also into what are the causes by country that will influence specifically in that country, for example, global carbon emissions. So if you think about milling processes, if you think about fertilizer use, all of those things, what we have started to do is we looked really deeply into our supply chains around the world, and we looked into the specific areas that we can target in each of those countries that in our opinion will have the biggest impact on a reduction, for example, on carbon emission. What do I want to say with that? If you look into an area, this is not specific to Asia now. I let Alfredo talk a little bit more about the Asian part. But if you look into Central or Latin America, primarily there's a lot of wet milling going on, which has a lot of energy use. So we were looking into ways of how can we change the way that the coffee is milled, moving away from a wet mill to a agua pulping system, which uses only 20% of the water that was used before. We're looking into, that's a global initiative, we're looking into soil analysis. One of the biggest factors for carbon emission is actually the production of fertilizer. So it's really important to understand that if you just pull fertilizer on the land without having a proper soil analysis behind it, first of all, you're not doing anything to your productivity, and secondly, you're just adding to the global carbon emissions. So having really specified work streams and analysis country by country, region by region, is our approach to make this as impactful as possible, because as I said in the beginning, there's no such thing as one size fits all.
Thank you, Tim. And I think that brings us to Alfredo, because I know that in your farmer support centers, you have a global network of these farmer support centers. Maybe you can talk to us about how climate change has already affected the nature of the work of the agronomists or the farmers that are working in these coffee farms. Alfredo?
Certainly, Pachita. Well, when you think about that, it's a very dramatic and direct impact. Perhaps the most notable one is the increase in temperature. Starbucks only buys Arabica coffee, right? And Arabica, this species is a very delicate plant, if you think about that. The conditions to obtain the fine taste, flavor, characteristics that most of the specialty buyers and roasters look after are very subtle. When you have this disruption in the climate patterns, then you have this plant more prone to disease, pest, lower quality, lower productivity. So these are the challenges, right? Perhaps you can picture this challenge when you see a mountain and the increase on the temperature. You will see that the lower parts of the mountain are now facing more hotter periods than the tops, right? So all of a sudden, the area where you can grow coffee starts being higher on top of the mountain. Tens of thousands of small coffee farmers in Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, East Timor are growing Arabica coffee that we are buying. As you can imagine, the farmers cannot go up into the mountain. They cannot move their farms. So that's already a challenge. There is another additional challenge that we are very aware is that perhaps because of the conditions are better on top of the mountain, some farmers, they have the temptation to move to start exploring the forest that it is in those higher grounds. So of course we want to avoid that. Why with Starbucks, what we are doing to tackle those issues? Several things. In Hacienda Alsacia in Costa Rica, we have a research and development center where we are looking into more than 100 different varieties hand in hand with World Coffee Research. We are trying to figure out what are the varieties best adapted to the new conditions, right? We were talking at the beginning of the presentation about resiliency, right? with new varieties, sturdy varieties, we can provide the coffee farmers with this badly needed resiliency. So that's one aspect that we are working very actively. In Indonesia, in Sumatra, Dr. Mawardi, our partner, the country manager in Sumatra, he has been also during his professional career developing different varieties that are resistant to pests and diseases. That we as a farmer support center in Indonesia, we are also promoting with the coffee community in the island. Also, this is a interesting approach with the shifting climate patterns in some places, as it was mentioned at some point during the presentation, you have some places that are now facing more frequent drought episodes. How can you provide the coffee plant with a better protection to those drought episodes? How you avoid the depletion of humidity on the soil? Well, here we are also promoting the use of shade trees, right? We are building shade plants specific for the areas with trees, species, native species that are also beneficial for the coffee. There are a certain number of native trees that are capturing nitrogen into the soil. That, to Tim's point, is also providing this extra kick of nitrogen that it is basic for life for coffee growing into the plantations. So these are few of the initiatives that we are doing in the area to provide vulnerable communities with this bad needed resiliency.
Thank you, Alfredo. And that's interesting because, you know, Indonesia has, as Eileen said, has the longest coastline, and a lot of people are going to be affected not only by drought, but by maybe tsunamis and all that. So it's really worrisome. And after having discussed Indonesia and some of Latin America, of course, we know that the biggest Robusta exporter is Vietnam. And I'd like to ask Dr. Dave Daze, who has worked in Vietnam for a long time. Dr. Dave, how does climate change affect the coffee production in Vietnam, being the lead exporter of Robusta coffee?
Thank you, Pasita. Yeah, I think actually Vietnam being the lead exporter is very, very vulnerable in terms of climate change. I think there are two issues. Number one, I think Aline in the beginning mentioned it already. We are seeing, although we don't see trends, we see that there are more recently longer drought events. Somehow Vietnam is in a good position to have a concrete drought because we can boost flowering by irrigating. But if these droughts become longer, we do not have enough water anymore, we face a very critical issue because without irrigation water, actually Vietnam would not be a coffee producing country. So I think that's the number one. The number two, I think, is erratic or unseasonal rainfall. And this comes at two different levels. If we look at the dry season, we see more and more that we have some rain showers during the dry season. But if you want to pollinate Robusta coffee, it's cross-pollinating. So it means that if you have a rain shower when the flowers are opening, you cannot have that cross-pollination, and basically you will lose your yield. So just one rain shower in the dry season can just stop or significantly reduce your yield at the end of the year. The second thing, in relation to erratic rainfall that we are experiencing here, we had one about 2-3 years ago, was that we had very heavy rainfall during the harvesting season. Now in Vietnam, the farmers traditionally do sun drying of coffee. And what is happening is, okay, there is rainfall, so people cannot dry their coffee anymore. So coffee cherries get infected by molds. And what we see is that actually, in the end, coffee cannot be exported anymore because it does not comply with the food quality standards anymore in the US, in European Union. So, so for me, those are the most critical issues in relation to climate change for Robusta.
Thank you, Dr. Dave. Now, I am gleaning from your discussions that one, Tim said that maybe wet milling may not be the trend anymore if we are lacking water and if it's not so energy efficient, Tim. Do you see a move towards more pulp natural, more natural coffees? Is that the trend you're seeing, Tim?
Well, I wouldn't call it a trend yet, but certainly within Starbucks, we are exploring that route. We have recently launched a very ambitious sustainability initiative that we shared with the world, where we want to become a climate positive company by 2050. And within that overall scheme, obviously coffee is a big component to achieve that. And within coffee, we looked into 5 areas where we think we can have a major impact towards that final goal. And yes, because we are a washed Arabica buyer, we as a company had to look into the wet milling process across the globe. And we certainly, for ourselves, we will go down that road. We will try to convince and incentivize coffee farmers around the world to come with us in this journey, because ultimately the benefit is not just for us, it's for everybody, and it's for the environment as well. So that's one of the aspects that we see in this initiative. The other one, as we said, is precision agronomy. So really targeting fertilization through soil analysis across the globe in the 30+ countries that we source coffee from. Because again, what we have seen and what we have witnessed is that a lot of times it is a generic fertilizer that is used. It is used in the wrong quantities, and ultimately, if we combine everything together with the ever-growing demand that we have for coffee, you know, we need to make sure that we will provide that coffee for the future generations as well. It has to be in a sustainable way. I think that for us is the key thing that comes together with the growth of the coffee sector is a sustainable way to do that. I think Alfredo was talking about that development of different trees that really adapt to the specific climates that you see around the world. But it's not just that; it's shade trees. It is reforestation as a whole, and it is also protecting the water sources that we have.
Thank you. So I'm seeing that will this mean also as a consumer, for me, as a coffee drinker, will I see different varieties now coming up, as Alfredo said, different climate resilient varieties that will have different taste profiles maybe? Alfredo, do you think that Arabica will have different flavor notes as you develop different varieties and be adaptable to climate change? Will you see this different flavor profiles? Yes, Tim or Alfredo. Yeah.
Right, Pasita, that's a very interesting point. In the research and development unit, we have certainly flavor is a key component, is a decision-making point. Mm-hmm. Before we continue working with that specific plant, we will cup it extensively within Starbucks and with the coffee community. We want to make sure that we are not going to sacrifice cup profile versus other characteristics that we may desire as well. Having said that, when you look at the story of Arabica coffee, it's been an ongoing process of research and development and coming up with new varieties. Within Starbucks, flavor profile is key component because we, as a brand, we really care for the quality in the cup for customers. And we want to make sure that we will continue to deliver that quality in the years to come. For us, that is an integral part of sustainability.
Okay, I will not lead this discussion into I want us to have happy solutions at the end of this panel. So I want to ask Dr. Dave so that we have an Arabica and a Robusta point of view. Dr. Dave, are you seeing that you're going to be planting again new varieties in Vietnam, or maybe change the way that Vietnam is going to be planting its coffee to cope with climate change? Yes.
This is a great question, and I want to add to Alfredo and Tim here. I'm also happy to learn that Starbucks is going carbon neutral. I've recently been involved in a study with International Union for Nature Conservation, where the question was, how can we save water in the Robusta sector? That was the intake. So I was looking at it and I said, yeah, the first thing you can do is, okay, just raise awareness to farmers and just reduce irrigation. That's a simple one. But that's not the solution. I think we have to go further, and we have to go towards crop diversification. And in that case, you look at what are the economic benefits for the farmer. So we're not just talking climate change, we're also talking risk diversification. Coffee prices are currently low, so we want to have alternatives. So I looked at a few fruit species, I looked at pepper, and what is interesting is that if you actually reduce your coffee plantation, your coffee stock by 20%, you can still increase your coffee yield, because we have new varieties in Vietnam. I am not talking about the flavors, maybe that is less important for Robustas. What is interesting as well is if you go for intercropping, you can save 40% of water. The farmer potentially can earn 2.5 times more than when he just grows monocrop. And he can sequester more carbon, 81% more. So I think this is a solution, but maybe you have a few other questions first, Pasita, because I also have some ideas on how to realize that.
Like I said, we will come up with solutions so that our coffee consumers, our coffee farmers, our coffee processors will have that, you know, ray of hope in preserving this drink, which is so important to all of us. So I will turn now again to our expert, Eileen, on what advice she could give the different coffee sector members. As you know, we are a value chain, a supply chain. The sector is composed of big and small players. What would you advise them as they assess the impacts of climate change, or where do they start?
Well, I want to go back to something that Tim said earlier, is that we always encourage businesses to take a two-pronged approach to climate change. You need to mitigate, you need to reduce your emissions, as well as you need to adapt. So with regards to mitigation, we're currently in a very critical decade. They're framing it in the climate community, the decisive decade, where we have these next 10 years to greatly reduce our emissions to keep global warming from no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. At the same time, due to decades of inaction in the global community, we are already facing the impacts from climate change today, so we must adapt. And that's where we need to build in some resilience. So I would encourage any business to where you sit on the supply chain is to avoid short-termism. You need to think long-term. You want your business to be around for several years into the next decade or so. We've talked a bit about the need to start with conducting a risk assessment. And that's also really important, as Tim mentioned too, that the climate risks are unique per location, not the same everywhere. And they'll be unique to your business too, depending on whom you are, if you're the roaster, the farmer, the distributor. So the solution or your resilience plan or strategy needs to be unique to your business. At BSR, we tried to create some sort of structure or framework that can help businesses and companies kind of guide them on how to look at this from a very holistic picture. We created a structure around capital assets. So can you break your business down into different types of assets so that you're thinking of your human assets, your employees, and how will they be affected, or your physical assets, the built environment, what can you do to protect that? Do you need more cooling systems to keep cool? But what sort of energy sources will you use so that you're being efficient? The natural assets, so we talked a bit about that today around, could there be more trees to provide shade? Could that also help with soil management to reduce runoff, to also help diversify crops? Can you look at some of more of the social assets of whom can you partner with in the community or your economic zones to maybe co-invest? What are the financial assets? Can you look at index-based insurance to avoid any sort of significant financial shock? So there are certain ways where you can start to look more holistically within your business of what you currently have that you can strengthen, or perhaps what you might need to create or invest in.
Thank you, thank you. And this brings me to, like, since we're looking at solutions, we talk about like, what kind of coffee should I now drink? You know, maybe the consumer, the 2 billion cups of coffee consumed a day must be sourced from, would you say, responsible roasters, must be sourced from farmers who practice, well, I guess the farmers who don't practice it will suddenly, will eventually fade into oblivion. But what is a consumer to do? How do I choose my coffee? Is my coffee basket going to look different? Tim, do you want to?
Yeah, sure.
There's an economic.
No, it's fine. But if I may just maybe add on something that Eileen was saying earlier, because I fully agree with everything she said. I would go a step further as an industry. I think we have to come to an understanding that this is something that is an industry-wide problem. And what we're seeing is that we have very, very different approaches, not a combined, unified approach as an industry. We need to get to a point where the entire industry, every single piece of the supply chain understands that that is a global problem. And if we're not starting to fix it, it's going to affect us in every single thing that we do every day. It's not just coffee, but if we stick to coffee, we would love to see a much more open approach from everybody to come together and talk on a pre-competitive level about the challenges that we have. Because you know what, unified and combined, we can make such a bigger difference than everybody for themselves. So I would invite this group as well to come together and start talking openly, pre-competitive, in a transparent way about the challenges and how can we together and combined get to a point where I don't think we can stop it completely, but certainly slow it down. As Eileen said, this next decade is crucial for everything that we do. And if we don't act now, we're going to see more and more devastating effects going forward. To your question is, yes, I think as a consumer, you should start demanding from the brand of your choice to act accordingly, and requesting more information. Well, what do you do? Understanding that everybody obviously is in a different position, and this is not something that anybody can implement overnight. It's an effort that starts with one thing. But building on that, I think that's where consumers need to start. We as an industry have the obligation, I think, to educate consumers as well. So this has to be a two-way conversation.
Two-way, the roaster, the processor, the farmer, the consumer. It's a two-way, four-way conversation. And Dr. Dave wanted to add to what Tim was saying. Dr. Dave?
I fully agree with Tim. And I think you asked us the question, what about the consumer? I think at the moment it's very difficult for the consumer to understand what product should he or she buy. There's a lot of labeling. We do not really know what these labels stand for. They're promoted as being socio-economically, environmentally friendly, all fine. I have been 20 years in the field and I feel like the reality is different. We thought that the labels would be pre-competitive, but actually it became a competitive business. So I'm not sure that we should continue with the labeling and the certification, but I would be more in favor of having like-minded partners, like Tim was saying, join together, venture, and put our support into a basket to solve concrete issues. So instead of ticking 100 compliance criteria to get a label on your pack, you rather look at 1 or 2 concrete issues in a country. One concrete example, currently There is an initiative in Vietnam, which is hosted by the Global Coffee Platform, where we look at the glyphosate issue, glyphosate, Roundup herbicide. A few companies came together and we just said, we want to tackle this problem. We put some funding together. Let's try to solve it and let's communicate to our consumers very concretely. So this is one of the proposals I would like to make today.
Thank you very much. I think the ASEAN Coffee Federation can definitely put this at the forefront of making a pre-competitive platform for saving or for preserving coffee. And if there's anybody who wants to comment, Victor, would you like to comment on that, Victor Ma of the ASEAN Coffee Federation?
Yes.
Please unmute Victor, yes.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, right. Well, I agree fully with what Tim, Alfredo, and Dr. Dave and the rest have said. I think here we have the ASEAN Coffee Federation, which can act as the platform for everybody unifying together to do something or towards this climate change effort. We have this platform here, and we are all well connected in this region. What we need is to get the companies, the corporations who are involved, not only in coffee, but also in maybe fertilizers and all that, to come on board and be with us together, right? This is something which we have been trying to do very desperately, and it's been a very hard toil on it. So I'm very happy to hear what Tim has to say. And, you know, please come along and join us in our effort to do something for this region so that we, as you say, the next 10 years is going to be crucial. I might not be around, but I hope everybody else will benefit from it. Okay, thank you.
Yes, if that is one solution that this panel will formulate, I think we would have succeeded in putting that message across, with the help of Eileen, of course, that all this coffee, you know, Arabica and Robusta, you'll soon be very conversant in all these varieties, Eileen, I'm sure. And I think that I have some questions. I have a few minutes for some questions from the audience, if you'll allow me. Stephanie Passeri said, what about identifying more precisely and transparently to consumers the origin? Some consumers are willing to pay a premium for quality, not only associated with taste, but increasing other factors such as sustainable practices. And I think that is where we're all leading. Like, it's not just about cup taste and all that, but is the company responsible? So I would think that the ACF, at least for our Asian producers, could start that. Don't you think, Victor? Well, Victor can chime in anytime.
Yes.
Victor? Yes.
Oh, thank you, Chit. Yes, definitely.
Okay.
So definitely.
So
that's something which we can aim towards and work towards.
So that was one of our questions. And if I may read a few more, is Eileen, it's nice to meet you. We in Indonesia are going to introduce new technology in farming, digital farming. Do you think this technology could be a solution to restrain 18% decrease in our production? That's from Leo Edi Wijaya. Eileen, have you heard of digital technology?
Digital farming, would like to learn a little bit more. I think that's the solutions should be explored. I can't say that would be the primary solution to ward off climate change. I think we need to be a little bit cautious in thinking that technology is going to save all of us. But could it be one of several options to consider if it's helping to reduce, let's say, water use, if it's helping to conserve water, particularly during the dry season, that could potentially be an option to reduce the pesticide use, perhaps that might lead to other challenges. It could be something to consider.
Thank you. There is a question from Cynthia Batin, and she's asking about agroforestry as a solution, the integration of other high-value crops. Have we considered such technologies? Like, for example, maybe I can ask Tim or Alfredo at Starbucks. I think Alfredo was discussing about agroforestry or planting with shade tree.
It is certainly an option. It is regarding also the fact that perhaps the conditions for better growth of coffee are high up in the mountain. It's something that of course the farmer need to approach in a very responsible manner, because we don't want any primary forest to be completely chopped out for coffee. However, it is true that there are some techniques that imply the use of these high value trees for timber, for logging at some point down the road. And it is certainly a viable option. And like we were saying at the top of the reunion, there is not a one solution fits all. Really, you need to make a plan around the area, around the farm, around the community, so you implement the solutions that are better fitted for that particular environment.
So I think we're all formulating what the future of coffee will look like. And so some last words from our panelists on what you would like farmers or consumers or our whole coffee ecosystem, what should we all be doing? Shall we start with Tim? Please unmute.
Thank you, Pachita. Look, I think I hope I already shared what my ideal vision would be, is really to move away from our own clusters and silos and our individual approach towards a sustainable future for coffee, into something that is global, holistic, and inclusive of everybody in the supply chain. That includes, in my mind, as I said, the consumer. We have the obligation to educate our consumers, and they in return have the obligation to require and demand from us as an industry to change. I also would like to emphasize that I do believe that there is a lot of donor funding around. So if people are thinking about, oh my God, how are we going to finance all of that? There are certain ways, but you know what? You can only get to that part when you open up and be transparent and share what your challenges are, so that the entire group of just the global coffee industry can come together and support whatever you want in your individual countries. So while I'm concerned, I'm also hopeful, because I do believe that in the power of many lies that there's a lot of things that we can achieve as a group.
Thank you. Dr. Dave?
I can only agree with Tim. I think the buzzword here today is pre-competitive partnership. And I think it's also important to have organizations like ACF involved in this, because we as industry have often difficulty to approach governments. If we want to go for scale, we also need governments in the producing countries, but also in the importing countries. So I think it's important to have a platform that can also convey our messages to another level.
Thank you, Dave. Alfredo?
Well, yes, this is clearly a responsibility of everyone, both consumers and industry. We and not only in coffee, but as in general, every single action we take is relevant. So every time we sip on a cup of coffee, we have to think further, what is the impact that is having? And we have to act responsibly. Whenever we have this big ecosystem thinking on the same direction, we are going to move faster to a solution that will fit for everyone, I would say.
So before I call Victor, I'd like Eileen to give her parting shot for all the coffee people for listening and watching.
I'll echo the same. Thank you. It's that each of us needs to take that responsibility and ownership to build that resilience. So it's in our own lives, in the decisions we make, so as such as consumers, what we buy and from whom, so that we're fully supporting more resilient businesses, but also economies, ecosystems, and livelihoods. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eileen. And Victor, please, let's wrap up this very fruitful discussion. Victor.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm really thrilled and excited by what the panel has come up with today. And I really look forward and hope that we can all work together in a unified form to promote all the things which we have talked about today. And I really look forward to working with everybody to push forward under the banner of ASEAN Coffee Federation, you know, as a unifying factor for producers, for traders, and for the consumer as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that just about wraps up our very, very climate change compliant discussion today. We want to be resilient. We want to drink coffee, and we want to have that coffee in more ways than one. So thank you to all our panelists. Again, we might call you sometime during the year for a review. Thank you, Eileen, Alfredo, Tim, Dr. Dave, and Victor. It's been my pleasure being your moderator again this afternoon. I'm Pasita Juan with the ASEAN Coffee Federation. And I know that everyone's excited for the next activity, which is the coffee auction. But in the meantime, let's save the planet. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.